I am Nefertiti Graham. The night my house burned to the foundation, I stood barefoot on the cracked asphalt holding my 5-year-old twins and called my mother for a place to sleep. She told me the guest rooms were full of floral arrangements. She told me I was a disruption. I will tell you the exact sentence she used to dismiss me. But first, I want you to picture the annoyance on her face. Hold that image in your mind, because 90 days later, that same face would drain of all color in front of 20 relatives when an eviction notice landed on her own dining table. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where we stop paying the toll for people who treat us like stepping stones. If you enjoy quiet calculations and consequences that arrive on paper, you belong here. Drop a comment with your age and tell me the moment you finally stopped being the family's safety net. And be sure to subscribe. This story starts in the ashes of a house fire and ends with a $624,000 void. Let me take you to the curb. The sound of a life collapsing is not a crash, it is a hiss. That is the detail that stays with you. At 3:14 in the morning, I stood on the pavement of my Tulsa driveway and listened to the electrical fire eat the living room I had painted 3 months prior. The heat warped the vinyl siding on the neighbor garage, yet the October air biting at my shoulders felt sharp. I am a commercial risk actuary. My entire career is built on calculating structural failure and determining what can be salvaged. Tonight, the ruin was mine. My left hand gripped the phone, my right arm wrapped tightly around my twins, Maya and Leo. A neighbor had draped a fleece blanket over their shoulders. They smelled of scorched pine and wet ash. Their breathing was shallow. I called my parents. They lived 20 minutes away in a sprawling estate. The phone rang 4 times. When my mother Patricia answered, her voice carried the specific, groggy irritation of a woman inconvenienced by a wrong number. I kept my tone level, filtering out the panic. I told her the house was gone. I said we made it out, but we had nothing, and I was bringing the kids over. The pause that followed stretched across the cell tower. You expect the rustle of bed sheets. You expect the sound of keys jingling. I expected the bare minimum of biological instinct. Instead, Patricia sighed. It was a measured exhalation, the breath you take when a checkout line moves too slowly. She asked me if I knew what time it was. I told her the roof had just caved in. Patricia cleared her throat. She informed me she was hosting the Historical Society brunch the next morning. The caterers were arriving at dawn. The house was pristine, she said, and she simply could not accommodate the soot and the disruption. I looked down at Maya. She was shivering watching a firefighter drag a canvas hose across our ruined lawn. I told my mother they just needed a floor to sleep on. Then she said the sentence that altered the trajectory of our family. Your sister Lauren never has these crises, Nefertiti. Lauren plans ahead. She lives in a fireproof home. Find a motel and we will talk after the brunch. The line clicked dead. The flashing red lights of the emergency vehicles painted the neighborhood in erratic bursts. Most daughters would weep. Most would dial back and plead. I did not. The fire had sanitized my perspective. The heat radiating from the frame of my house reached my skin, but internally the temperature plummeted. In my profession, an anomaly in the data forces a reassessment of the entire ledger. Patricia prioritizing hydrangeas over her grandchildren was a severe anomaly. For 10 years, I had accepted her narrative. She claimed my father Richard was drowning in debt from his failing logistics company. She claimed she had crippling medical deductibles. I had played the reliable beast of burden. But standing in the street, my actuarial brain processed the statistics. If they were on the brink of ruin, they would not be hosting catered society brunches. If Lauren was an independent prodigy, she would not be sustaining a luxury mortgage in a premier gated community on a dental receptionist's salary. The math failed. The story was a lie. I was not a safety net. I was an exploited revenue stream. Still standing on the asphalt, I bypassed my call log and opened my banking application. The screen glowed harshly against the dark. I navigated to the automated transfer menu. 10 years ago, my late husband passed away, leaving a life insurance policy. At 25, I utilized those survivor benefits and my subsequent corporate salary to stabilize my parents. Every first of the month, a scheduled draft left my account. $5,200. 120 consecutive months. $624,000. I traded the security of my own household to ensure they could keep their heads above water. Tonight, they locked the doors. I placed my thumb over the active recurring transfer labeled Family Support. I tapped the payment settings. I hit cancel. A green check mark appeared. The transaction vanished. The decade-long extortion ended not with a scream, but with the silent processing of a server. The pipeline ran dry. I slipped the phone into my pocket, gathered my children, and walked toward my car. They had no idea the power source to their pristine lives had just been severed. I steered my sedan toward the interstate, searching for glowing vacancy signs. I secured a sterile motel room off Interstate 44. The lobby smelled of stale ammonia. Inside the room, I laid Maya and Leo on the stiff polyester bedspread. The silence was heavy. I sat on the edge of the mattress and waited for the sun to rise. Room 114 of the Interstate Motel smelled of stale ammonia and ancient coffee grounds. The air conditioning unit in the window rattled with a rhythmic, metallic cough, struggling to filter the humid Oklahoma night. I laid Maya and Leo on the stiff polyester bedspread. They huddled together in the center of the mattress, their small faces smeared with gray soot. They breathed in the shallow, rapid cadence of exhausted children. I stood over them for a long duration. The scent of charred pine wood and melted plastic insulation clung to my pajamas. My skin felt uncomfortably tight. I walked to the laminated desk in the corner and opened my laptop. The monitor illuminated the cramped space in a harsh, unforgiving white glow. I am a specialist in assessing corporate liability. When a company faces a structural deficit, my function is to locate the leak, calculate the physical depreciation, and separate what is salvageable from what is ruined beyond repair. Tonight, the catastrophe was not the physical structure of my home. The true total loss was my understanding of my own family. For a decade, I functioned as the dependable daughter. In modern society, taking on that specific title is rarely a compliment. It is a lifelong financial obligation. Our regional culture operates on an unspoken currency of blind loyalty. You revere your elders. You protect the family reputation at all costs. You swallow your own hardships to maintain the pristine facade of unity. I bought into that regional illusion. I foolishly believed paying the required toll meant I held a place of genuine value in their hearts. Sitting in that rigid plastic chair, I logged into my secure banking portal. I needed to confront the hidden ledger. The origin of this arrangement required looking back 10 years. A decade ago, my husband David died in a highway collision. I was 25 years old, navigating profound grief, holding a life insurance settlement that was supposed to serve as my secure foundation. 5 years later, I would have the twins on my own, determined to build a resilient life. But in those early, fragile days of widowhood, my parents recognized a distinct opportunity. My father, Richard, operated a regional freight logistics company. Shortly after the insurance payout cleared, Patricia sat at my kitchen table and wept. She spun a terrifying narrative of impending bankruptcy. She claimed Richard was drowning in vendor deficits, rising diesel costs, and broken axles. She layered this with a sudden, severe autoimmune diagnosis, citing staggering out-of-pocket medical deductibles. She warned that they were weeks away from losing their social standing and their home. I was young, earning a strong actuary salary, alongside David's settlement, and conditioned from birth to fix their problems. I stepped in without hesitation. I believed it was my duty to keep them afloat. I lived modestly, worked grueling 60-hour weeks, analyzing risk portfolios, and funded their survival. I accessed the archive statements on my screen. I let the raw arithmetic settle in my mind. $5,200 every 30 days, 120 consecutive months, $624,000. That capital was my safety net. It was my children's future university tuition. It was the liquidity I could have utilized to upgrade our own circumstances or rebuild my life tonight without blinking. Instead, it had evaporated into a joint checking account controlled by Patricia and Richard. I traded my own economic security to subsidize their comfort, operating under the delusion that I was performing a noble duty. The intense heat of the house fire had burned away the fog. Looking at the columns of transferred funds, my professional instincts overrode my residual shock. The math simply did not support the story my mother told. If my father's freight business was truly failing, they would not be hosting catered historical society brunches on a random Sunday morning. If Patricia's health was legitimately in jeopardy, she would not be playing tennis at the country club or prioritizing imported floral centerpieces over the safety of her twin grandchildren. They possessed plenty of resources. They simply preferred to hoard theirs and spend mine. The most glaring statistical impossibility was my younger sister. Lauren lived in a pristine gated community in Nichols Hills. She drove a luxury European sports utility vehicle. She wore designer labels and took frequent destination vacations. Yet her official occupation was a receptionist at a boutique dental clinic. A receptionist's salary does not underwrite a fireproof sanctuary in the wealthiest zip code in the county. I was not saving my parents from ruin. I was subsidizing a counterfeit reality. I had financed the very pedestal my mother placed my younger sister upon. I moved the cursor over the transaction history. I did not experience a sudden surge of vindication. I did not feel powerful or triumphant. I only felt the cold, flat clarity of a closed file. I had willingly funded my own exclusion. Earlier on the curb, I had accessed my phone and initiated the cancellation sequence for the upcoming draft. Now, staring at the decade-long ledger, I confirmed the termination. The recurring transfer was gone from the active list. The tourniquet was officially applied. Tomorrow was the first of the month. The automated clearinghouse protocols for the regional bank typically process recurring transfers by dawn. Patricia would check her shared account balance, fully expecting to see the monthly influx of capital required to maintain their aristocratic charade. Instead, she would find an empty void. The financial shockwave was coming, and they had no idea the ground beneath their comfortable lives had already collapsed. I leaned back in the chair. The silence in the motel room felt incredibly heavy. 11 years of quiet extortion ended with a few silent clicks. My parents had treated my steady, responsible nature as an endless revenue stream. They abandoned me in the ashes because I was no longer a person to them. I was merely an account that required periodic management. When I presented a problem that did not involve writing a check, my mother deemed me a disruption. I did not sleep a single wink. I sat by the window and watched the desolate highway through the gap in the curtains. The sky began to turn a bruised, pale shade of purple. The relentless ticking of my laptop fan synchronized with the rattling air conditioner. I waited for the inevitable fallout. I waited for the panic to set in across town. Just as the horizon cracked with the first gray light of morning, a pair of bright headlights swept across the cracked asphalt parking lot. The intense beams cut sharply through the thin, dusty motel curtains, sweeping across the dark painted walls of room 114. The vehicle did not pass by on the frontage road. It pulled directly into the parking space right outside my door. The heavy engine cut off, plunging the lot back into a dense quiet. A heavy truck door groaned open and slammed shut with a solid metallic thud. Footsteps echoed against the concrete walkway. They were deliberate and unhurried. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled the flimsy wooden door. I stood up from the laminated desk. My pulse steadied. I walked toward the entryway, checking the peephole. The person standing under the flickering amber light of the exterior corridor was not a stranger, nor was it the mother who had abandoned me. I unlatched the security chain and turned the deadbolt. Standing under the flickering amber light of the exterior corridor was Grandpa Harrison. My 78-year-old grandfather is a retired independent oil wildcatter. He spent his youth drilling in the Anadarko Basin, building a fortune from the dirt up. He wears practical canvas jackets, heavy denim, and scuffed leather boots. He understands the fundamental difference between owning the soil beneath your feet and merely decorating the surface. He detests social pretense, viewing my mother's country club aspirations as a tragic waste of human energy. Harrison stepped into the cramped space. He did not offer hollow platitudes. He did not pull me into a theatrical embrace or deliver tearful promises that the universe would provide. He operated with the precise, clinical efficiency of a foreman arriving at a compromised drill site. His sharp eyes scanned the ammonia-scented room, lingering on the soot staining my pajamas and the exhausted posture of my sleeping children. His jaw set into a rigid line. He walked straight to the stiff polyester bedspread and scooped Maya and Leo into his broad arms, lifting them as if they weighed nothing. "We do not beg," Harrison stated. His voice was a low, growly rumble that vibrated within the sterile room. "Gather your laptop. We are leaving this roadside hazard." Within 3 minutes, we abandoned the motel. I secured the twins in the spacious rear cabin of his heavy-duty pickup truck. The interior smelled faintly of diesel fuel, peppermint, and worn leather upholstery. I sank into the passenger seat. Harrison shifted the transmission into drive and steered us back onto the dark interstate highway. The Oklahoma landscape rolled past the glass windows. The sky transformed from pitch black to a bruised, pale gray as dawn broke over the distant tree lines. For the first several miles, the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the tires gripping the asphalt. I kept my gaze focused on the illuminated dashboard, processing the permanent fracture of my nuclear family. The isolation of the past few hours began to recede, replaced by the steady presence of the man navigating the vehicle. "You canceled the bank draft," Harrison noted. He kept his eyes strictly on the road ahead. It was not a question. It was a formal assessment of the damage. I turned my head to look at his profile. I had never mentioned the financial arrangement to him. I operated under the assumption that my parents kept the monthly bailouts a closely guarded secret to protect their pride within the community. "I stopped the payments an hour ago," I replied. My voice sounded raspy from the residual smoke inhalation. I explained the arithmetic to him. I detailed how I could no longer fund Richard in his failing logistics company. I outlined Patricia's escalating medical deductibles. I stated that I required my own capital to rebuild my life from the ashes, and my mother had refused to offer us a floor to sleep on. Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. It held zero humor. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel with intense, visible pressure. "Richard has not carried commercial debt on those freight lines since 2014, Harrison said. "The business operates entirely in the black. It generates a steady, comfortable annual profit margin." I froze in the passenger seat. The words hung suspended in the confined space of the truck cabin. My actuarial mind, trained to identify discrepancies in complex corporate portfolios, hit a sudden, jarring roadblock. "And your mother," Harrison continued, his tone dropping in temperature, "possesses the physical constitution of a draft horse. She carries a premium health coverage plan that pays out at 100%. She has not received a legitimate out-of-pocket medical bill in over a decade." The silence that followed was profound. A dual-ledger deception of staggering proportions unspooled in my head. If there was no failing business and no catastrophic medical crisis, the entire equation evaporated. The fundamental basis of my monthly obligation was a fabricated claim. "Then where did the funds go?" I asked. Harrison signaled a lane change before answering. He glanced at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "I assumed you knew," he replied. "Patricia told me you were voluntarily investing in your sister's real estate portfolio. She claimed you acted as a silent partner for Lauren, helping her secure that gated property in Nichols Hills as a long-term family asset. I thought you were subsidizing the mortgage out of your own free will." The mutual realization struck us both with physical force. Patricia had lied to her father to mask the extortion, framing my financial bleeding as a savvy investment strategy. She weaponized my grief over David's death to harvest my survivor benefits while simultaneously telling Harrison I was a willing participant in Lauren's luxury lifestyle. She played us against each other, exploiting his respect for privacy and my misplaced sense of duty. "You thought I chose to live on a razor-thin margin so Lauren could drive a luxury vehicle?" I murmured. Harrison nodded slowly. He realized the depth of his daughter's deception. "She built a greenhouse around Lauren," he noted quietly, "and she used your soil to grow it." The nature of the betrayal mutated. It shifted from simple emotional neglect into systematic, calculated financial fraud. They did not merely abandon me during a physical crisis. They had actively harvested my resources for 120 months to elevate the child they preferred. They treated my steady, responsible nature as an endless revenue stream. I did not shed a single tear. When a client submits a fraudulent inventory list after a hurricane, I do not experience anger. I simply gather the documentation necessary to deny the payout. Sitting in the passenger seat of the truck, I realized my parents were nothing more than hostile claimants. They had submitted a false narrative to extract over $500,000 from my accounts. We pulled off the main highway and turned onto a long gravel driveway. Wrought iron gates parted to reveal Harrison's property. The ranch stood resolute against the morning sky, surrounded by acres of quiet grazing land. The house was constructed of solid timber and native stone. It was an environment built on actual substance, devoid of the fragile, expensive pretenses my mother worshipped. Harrison parked near the broad wooden porch. Before he turned off the ignition, he looked at me with his flinty, uncompromising eyes. "Do not waste your energy mourning a ghost," he instructed. "Anger makes you sloppy and predictable. You are a risk actuary by trade. Stop grieving the family you thought you possessed. Start auditing the thieves you actually have." We carried the sleeping twins inside and settled them into a spare bedroom down the hall. The sheets were crisp and smelled of fresh air. I stood in the doorway for a moment, ensuring their breathing was steady and calm. Then I walked into the sprawling kitchen. Harrison had already placed a steaming mug of black coffee on a solid oak table. I took a seat. I opened my laptop. The battery icon indicated I had several hours of power remaining. I bypassed my personal banking portal. This specific situation required heavier professional machinery. I connected to the secure wireless network, preparing to access comprehensive public record databases. I was no longer the discarded daughter seeking maternal validation. I was a licensed auditor initiating a targeted inquiry. I typed my credentials into the corporate login screen. The database interface loaded, presenting a blank, blinking search bar. I prepared to treat my own family history exactly like a fraudulent insurance claim, ready to follow the digital paper trail wherever the numbers led. Just as my fingers hovered over the keyboard, my smartphone illuminated on the table. A sharp electronic chime broke the quiet of the ranch kitchen. I glanced at the glowing screen. A push notification from my banking application hovered over the lock screen. Transaction processed. $10,000. Initiated by Patricia Graham. I stared at the pixels forming her name. My breath hitched in my throat. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the hardened armor of the actuary cracked, and the displaced daughter resurfaced. Did she feel remorse? Did she see the news of the neighborhood fire, realize the gravity of her callous dismissal, and wire emergency relief funds to help us secure clothing and shelter? Did my mother finally decide to show up for her children in the ashes of our ruined life? I tapped the glowing banner on my phone screen. The banking application requested my fingerprint. The interface loaded, replacing the push notification with the detailed ledger. I looked at the $10,000 transaction. There was no plus sign next to the number. The font was not green. It was bold, stark black, preceded by a minus symbol. Status pending. Patricia had not sent emergency relief funds to shelter her displaced grandchildren. She had logged into our shared emergency account the moment she realized her monthly $5,200 draft had been canceled. Recognizing the power source was severed, her instinct was not to check if we survived the fire. Her instinct was to manually drain my remaining liquidity before I could change the passwords. She was executing a panicked, preemptive strike on my savings. The fleeting fraction of hope I felt a moment ago evaporated, leaving behind a sterile, clinical vacuum. I stood up from the oak table. Harrison watched me from the kitchen counter, holding a ceramic mug. He read the shift in my posture. She requested a $10,000 withdrawal, I informed him. My voice held zero inflection. She is trying to siphon the joint account. Harrison set his mug down with a sharp clack. The compassion in his eyes hardened into tactical focus. I will watch the twins, he instructed. Go secure your vault. I grabbed my car keys from the table. I did not bother changing out of my soot-stained pajamas. I drove my sedan back onto the two-lane county highway, steering toward the commercial district of Tulsa. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the flat Oklahoma plains. The air inside the vehicle smelled faintly of ash, a lingering reminder of the home I had just lost. Yet my mind was entirely detached from the wreckage. I was operating in the specific cognitive space I reserve for high-stakes corporate triage. I pulled into the parking lot of the regional bank branch at 8:45 in the morning. I parked facing the main entrance and waited. I watched the employees arrive, unlocking the heavy glass double doors. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stepped out of my vehicle. The interior of the bank was quiet, smelling of citrus floor cleaner and fresh printer ink. I bypassed the teller line and walked directly to the branch manager's glass-partitioned office. A middle-aged man wearing a tailored gray suit looked up from his monitor. I did not wait for an invitation. I opened his door and sat in the leather guest chair. I presented my state identification and my corporate actuary credentials. I instructed him to pull up the joint checking account registered to Nefertiti Graham and Patricia Graham. He tapped his keyboard, his eyes scanning the screen. I see a pending transfer request for $10,000, he noted, his tone polite but cautious. Cancel the pending transfer, I directed, then freeze the account entirely, suspend all outgoing routing privileges, revoke the secondary debit card, and remove Patricia Graham as an authorized user. The manager hesitated. He adjusted his posture, clearly uncomfortable with the abruptness of the demand. Because your mother is listed as a joint holder, removing her requires a notarized signature from both parties, or we must close the account and issue a cashier's check for the balance. Then close it, I replied without missing a beat. Liquidate the balance, sever the connection. He typed the commands. The mechanical clicking of his keyboard filled the small office. He printed a final statement and slid a heavy paper check across the polished mahogany desk. The funds were secured. Patricia's access was permanently revoked. I folded the check, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out through the heavy glass doors. The physical threat was neutralized. The internal audit could now shift into the external world. I drove back to the ranch. The morning air was crisp. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the methodical endurance required for forensic data processing. When I walked back into the kitchen, Harrison was sitting on the floor of the den, letting Maya and Leo build a tower out of wooden blocks. They were safe. The perimeter was secure. I returned to the oak table, opened my laptop, and connected to the power supply. I logged into my secure network portal. I bypassed the standard banking interface and accessed the raw, comma-separated value files. I initiated a bulk export, pulling every transaction history from the past decade. The software generated a comprehensive file containing 120 months of automated deposits. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began to construct my matrix. Column A represented the date. Column B denoted the amount. Column C tracked the outgoing destination. When I first established the financial support arrangement 10 years ago, I opened the joint checking account to function as a dedicated emergency fund for Richard's Logistics Company and Patricia's medical care. Because I was the primary depositor, I trusted the capital was utilized for those specific survival mechanisms. That naive trust was a profound actuarial error. I aligned the deposit data sets with the withdrawal history on my widescreen monitor. The pattern materialized almost instantly. It was not a chaotic spread of random bills, pharmacy copays, or diesel fuel invoices. It was a highly organized, systematic routing protocol. Every single month, exactly 48 hours after my $5,200 cleared the system, the funds were fractured and dispatched to two distinct corporate entities. I retrieved two highlighters from my bag. I am a creature of tactile habit. Digital data is abstract, but physical color coding reveals the true architecture of a fraud. I highlighted the first recurring outgoing transfer in bright blue ink, $3,800. I highlighted the second recurring outgoing transfer in stark red ink, $1,400. The mathematics of betrayal are incredibly soothing because they remove all ambiguity. The matrix balanced to the exact penny. My parents did not utilize a single cent of my money for their own survival. They acted as a laundering mechanism. I stared at the blue and red rows. The numbers told a flawless story, but the narrative lacked specific coordinates. Where were these routing numbers actually going? They did not match the billing departments of any regional hospital network. They did not match the vendor profiles of commercial freight suppliers. I opened a secondary browser window. I accessed the county property assessor's public database and the state corporate registry. I possessed the legal authorization to trace fiscal accountability. I typed the blue routing destination into the search parameters. The screen refreshed. The blue ink represented a premium residential mortgage lender. I cross-referenced the loan identification number with the property deeds in Nichols Hills. The account matched the exact lot boundaries of the fireproof, gated sanctuary where my sister Lauren resided. My trauma was paying her principal and interest. I typed the red routing destination into the search bar. The screen refreshed again. The red ink was split between the financing department of a high-end automotive dealership and the membership billing office of the most exclusive country club in Tulsa. I subsidized a counterfeit perfection. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the screen. The laundering operation was clear, but the core foundation of my parents' lie remained unresolved. If my money funded Lauren, how was Richard surviving? Patricia claimed his freight company was drowning in debt. Harrison claimed the business was profitable. I needed the raw corporate data. I entered Richard's legal name and his logistics company's federal tax identification number into the state commercial registry. I initiated a deep background audit on his corporate filings, searching for profit and loss declarations, bankruptcy claims, or vendor liens. The search results populated on my monitor. I read the legal summaries. I read them a second time to ensure my professional comprehension was accurate. The discrepancy was staggering. The business was not drowning. It was not even profitable. It simply did not exist anymore. I clicked on the transfer of ownership documents. What I found in those digitized legal pages changed the entire landscape of the deception. It revealed a plot twist so profound it elevated the betrayal from simple extortion to a masterclass in generational greed. The digital document loading on my monitor was a formalized legal filing from the state commercial registry. It bore the title of Asset Purchase Agreement. I leaned closer to the screen. My father, Richard, had founded Graham Logistics in the late 1990s. Growing up, I remembered the smell of motor oil on his boots and the endless complaints about diesel prices. I had always assumed the business was a precarious endeavor, constantly teetering on the edge of insolvency. That was the narrative Patricia drilled into our heads around the dinner table. It was the exact narrative she weaponized 10 years ago to secure my monthly bailouts. But the contract displayed on my laptop was dated 5 years ago. 60 months had passed since this document was notarized. The purchaser listed on the agreement was a national supply chain conglomerate seeking to absorb smaller regional freight routes. The seller was Richard Graham. I scrolled down to the financial clauses, my eyes scanning the dense legal text, until I found the final disbursement figure. The purchase price was 7 figures, a multi-million-dollar acquisition. My breathing slowed to a measured, deliberate rhythm. I opened a new tab and traced the conglomerate payment routing. The buyout capital did not flow into the joint checking account I shared with my parents. It bypassed their local Oklahoma banks entirely. The funds were wired directly into a blind trust registered in Delaware. A blind trust is a standard corporate vehicle utilized by high net worth individuals to shield vast liquidity from public tax liabilities and legal scrutiny. Richard was not a struggling blue-collar business owner facing imminent vendor liens. He was a multimillionaire hiding behind a corporate veil. The implications of this discovery settled over me like a heavy winter frost. For 5 years, my father possessed enough hidden wealth to generate substantial compound interest. He had the resources to pay off any medical deductible fund, any lifestyle, and secure any property he desired. Yet every single month he allowed Patricia to cash my $5,200 check. He sat at my kitchen table during Thanksgiving dinners, watching me work 60-hour weeks to compensate for the missing income. He watched me clip coupons, delay purchasing new clothes for the twins, and calculate my grocery budgets down to the penny. He watched his widowed daughter drain her late husband's survivor benefits, knowing he had millions sitting untouched in a Delaware trust. The motive was no longer desperation. It was unadulterated, sociopathic greed. Wealthy people often maintain their fortunes by utilizing other people's money. Richard and Patricia wanted to fund an aristocratic existence, but they refused to deplete their own secret nest egg to do it. Instead, they maintained the illusion of poverty to keep my financial pipeline open. I was their personal, interest-free slush fund. I shifted my focus back to the spreadsheet I had constructed earlier. The blue and red highlighted columns stared back at me, waiting for their final context. I knew the capital was not going to my parents. I knew it was routed to Nichols Hills and a luxury auto dealership. I typed my sister name into the county property assessor database, Lauren Graham. The deed populated on the screen. The Nichols Hills property, the exact fireproof gated sanctuary Patricia had praised at 3 a.m, was registered under Lauren's name. I pulled up the real estate listing history. The initial down payment on that estate occurred exactly 10 years ago. It coincided perfectly with the first massive withdrawal from my joint emergency account. My trauma had literally poured the concrete for her foundation. Lauren's entire identity was a manufactured illusion. At every family gathering, Patricia lauded my younger sister as the independent prodigy. We were subjected to endless lectures about Lauren's superior life choices, her impeccable financial planning, and her flawless aesthetic. She was the golden child who never required assistance. I was the perpetual burden, the designated workhorse whose only value was writing checks. The reality was that Lauren worked as a receptionist at a boutique dental clinic. She earned an entry-level wage. She did not possess the financial acumen to secure a premier mortgage, let alone the capital to lease a European sports utility vehicle or pay exorbitant country club dues. Her pristine life was a sponsored exhibit. David died on a highway 10 years ago, leaving behind a life insurance policy intended to ensure Maya and Leo would never experience hunger or cold. Patricia and Richard took that sacred safety net and transformed it into granite countertops, imported rugs, and spa days for their favorite child. The cold mathematics of the situation were absolute. Numbers lack empathy. They do not possess the capacity to lie, manipulate, or gaslight. They simply exist as a record of human behavior. The record indicated a decade of systematic, calculated theft executed by the people who were supposed to protect me. I sat in the quiet ranch kitchen. Harrison remained in the adjoining den, building wooden towers with my children. The ambient noise of the morning, the distant chirp of a bird, the hum of the refrigerator felt detached from the silent execution occurring on my laptop. I did not break down. My professional training insulated my mind from the emotional shockwave. When a risk actuary uncovers a severe structural decay within a corporation, they do not mourn the collapsing building. They compile the evidence, secure the perimeter, and prepare the final audit report. I began saving the digital files. I downloaded the Delaware Trust Registration. I saved the multi-million-dollar asset purchase agreement. I exported the county property deeds linking Lauren to the Nichols Hills estate. I merged these documents with the 120 months of highlighted banking ledgers. I created a master directory on my secure cloud server. I titled the folder with a simple clinical designation. I dragged the compiled evidence into the directory. I moved the cursor to the top of the screen and clicked Save. A green progress bar appeared, tracking the upload. The data encoded itself into the permanent architecture of the Internet. The truth was now tangible, backed up and ready to be deployed. The progress bar hit 100%. The window closed. In that exact second, the physical world reacted to the digital shift. My smartphone, resting face down on the oak table, began to vibrate against the wood. A sharp, urgent electronic chime broke the silence of the kitchen. I turned the device over. The screen illuminated, displaying a new push notification. It was a text message from Lauren. The message was not a simple greeting. It was a block of frantic, capitalized text. The financial shockwave of my canceled automated draft had successfully traveled across the city. It had bypassed the locked joint account, skipped over my parents' hidden millions, and crashed directly into the golden child unearned reality. The money had stopped flowing. The illusion was fracturing. I stared at the glowing pixels on my phone, watching my sister demand answers for a crisis she did not yet understand. The smartphone vibrated against the solid oak table, emitting a sharp, rhythmic buzz that disrupted the quiet of the ranch kitchen. I looked down at the glowing screen. The push notification displayed a new text message. The sender was Lauren. Growing up, my younger sister was cultivated like a rare, fragile orchid. Patricia designed her environment to ensure she never faced the harsh weather of consequence. Lauren never held a summer job to pay for her own gasoline. She never balanced a checking ledger. She was groomed to be an ornamental extension of our mother's social ambitions. Her singular role in the family dynamic was to project an image of effortless perfection. This lifelong conditioning created a staggering level of insulation. I reached out and unlocked the device. I opened the messaging application and read the paragraph of text. Nefertiti, my platinum card just bounced at the front desk of the country club. The spa manager looked at me like a common criminal in front of half the tennis committee. Did you forget to authorize the monthly deposit for the family trust account? I know you had that fire last night, but you need to call the bank and fix this glitch right now. I have a hot stone massage appointment in 20 minutes, and this is humiliating. The sheer audacity of her grievance hovered in the sterile air of the room. My sister treated a catastrophic electrical fire, an event that destroyed my home and left her 5-year-old niece and nephew displaced in the middle of the night, as a minor administrative hurdle delaying her leisure schedule. She relegated my trauma to a brief, inconvenient preface before demanding her money. However, the specific terminology she deployed revealed the true depth of her psychological conditioning. The family trust account. Lauren genuinely believed our parents managed a communal reservoir of generational wealth. She lived in a pristine bubble, operating under the assumption that the capital for her Nichols Hills sanctuary, her European vehicle, and her country club spa days magically materialized from Richard's offshore investments. She had no concept that the family trust was actually her older, widowed sister, working 60-hour weeks analyzing corporate risk portfolios. She thought her flawless life was an inherent birthright. She believed she occupied a higher social tier through divine favor and superior choices. She expected me to apologize for the inconvenience. She expected me to immediately dial a customer service representative and untangle the wires. She expected the invisible machinery of her privilege to resume its quiet operation without requiring her to examine how the gears actually turned. In the past, a message of this nature would trigger an immediate anxious response from me. I would scramble to transfer funds from my personal savings to cover the deficit, terrified of displeasing the family hierarchy. I would swallow the insult of her dismissing my house fire just to keep the peace. Today, I did not type a defensive paragraph. I did not engage in emotional theater. I utilized a technique I perfected during hostile corporate audits. You do not argue with a delusional claimant. You hand them the raw data and let the gravity of the truth crush their false reality. I tapped the reply field. My keystrokes were deliberate and unhurried. I did not require exclamation points or paragraphs of explanation. I typed exactly 2 sentences. The account is permanently closed. Check your mortgage routing numbers. I pressed send. A soft chime confirmed the delivery. I placed the device back onto the table. I did not lock the screen. I wanted to observe the real-time deterioration of her unearned privilege. The read receipt appeared under my message instantly. For 3 minutes, the screen remained dormant. I pictured Lauren standing in the marble lobby of the country club, wearing her designer athletic wear, staring at those 10 words. The cognitive dissonance was likely suffocating. The phrase, mortgage routing numbers, was a targeted strike at the very foundation of her identity. She was being forced to confront the impossible math of her own existence. She was realizing the invisible safety net she stood upon belonged to the sister she held in deep contempt. Then the small gray typing indicator appeared at the bottom of the screen. The device began to chime in rapid succession. What do you mean closed? What routing numbers? Nefertiti, answer me right now. How am I supposed to pay my homeowner assessment fee? Stop ignoring me and call me back. The messages stacked on the screen shifting rapidly from entitled annoyance to confusion and finally escalating into blind panic. The golden child illusion was fracturing right there in the country club lobby, exposing the ugly, parasitic truth beneath her polished surface. I did not answer. Silence is the most lethal pressure you can apply to a person who relies on noise to maintain control. When you explain yourself, you give the opposing party a thread to pull. You give them a premise to argue against. By withholding the explanation, I denied her the comfort of a debate. I forced Lauren to sit alone in the void of her own collapsing reality. She had to process the terror of impending financial ruin without my guidance. I watched the screen until the backlight timed out and faded to black. The chimes ceased. The gray typing indicator vanished. The abrupt end to her text messages signaled a critical shift in the battlefield. Lauren had realized I was no longer an active participant in her rescue. Her panic required an outlet, and there was only one other person who could provide answers regarding the mythical family trust. She was calling Patricia. Somewhere across the city, my mother was about to pick up her phone. She was expecting to coordinate centerpieces for her historical society brunch. Instead, she would hear her favorite child screaming about closed accounts, bounced platinum cards, and exposed mortgage routing numbers. The invisible cage of their shared extortion had lost its power source. Patricia would instantly realize the decade-long theft was uncovered. The forensic audit was no longer a secret. My mother is a creature of severe social preservation. When a cornered predator recognizes a trap has snapped shut, they do not surrender. They lash out. Patricia would not call me to apologize. She would not offer a tearful confession. She would recognize that her reputation, her least luxury lifestyle, and her control over the family narrative were facing imminent destruction. To survive the exposure, she needed to control the story before I could publish the ledger. She needed to discredit the auditor. She would prepare a preemptive strike utilizing the only weapon she had left. The silence stretching across the oak table did not last. Lauren had undoubtedly reached Patricia by now, demanding an explanation for her declined platinum card and the closed accounts. Patricia, realizing the financial pipeline was permanently capped and her hidden wealth exposed, initiated her protocol. In affluent Oklahoma circles, physical confrontation is considered unrefined. Warfare is conducted through secondary channels. It is a highly efficient communication matrix disguised as Christian concern. I call it the Whisper Network. It operates through prayer groups, group text chains, and hushed conversations over iced tea. Its primary function is social policing, enforcing compliance through the threat of reputational ruin. My phone illuminated again, but the notifications did not originate from my sister. The caller identification displayed Aunt Clara. Clara views herself as the moral compass of our extended bloodline. She delivers devastating judgments wrapped in a tone of overwhelming pity. I did not accept the voice call. I let it route to the automated voicemail system. 10 seconds later, a text message appeared on my lock screen. Nefertiti, sweet girl. Your mother just called me in tears. We are all keeping you in our deepest prayers today. I know the trauma of losing your home has clouded your judgment. We are here to support your mental health during this confusing breakdown. Before I could process Clara's message, another notification chimed. This one was from Uncle David. So worried about you, kiddo. Patricia is heartbroken over your erratic behavior. Please seek counseling. Abandoning your sick parents in their hour of need is not the way to handle your grief. A third message arrived from a cousin I had not spoken to in 6 months, echoing the exact same sentiments about my supposed psychological fragility and Patricia's deep sorrow. I sat back in the wooden chair, studying the glowing glass screen. The strategy was brilliantly insidious. My mother was executing a textbook preemptive strike. She knew I possessed the banking ledgers. She knew I could prove the decade of extortion, the offshore accounts, and the luxury mortgage payments. Therefore, she needed to ensure that no one would believe the auditor. She was actively weaponizing the destruction of my home. Patricia was framing my sudden financial rebellion as a severe psychological fracture. By painting me as hysterical, ungrateful, and unhinged due to smoke inhalation and shock, she preemptively discredited any evidence I might present. If I attempted to expose the hidden millions or Lauren's subsidized sanctuary, the relatives would simply view my spreadsheets as the paranoid delusions of a traumatized victim. They were utilizing my actual crisis to protect her counterfeit reality. She was building an impenetrable wall of plausible deniability, positioning herself as the weeping, martyred mother, suffering the abuses of a deranged child. The natural human instinct when accused of cruelty is to defend your character. You want to type furious paragraphs, attach screenshots of routing numbers, and demand vindication. You want to scream the truth into the void to clear your name. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, a physical pressure pressing against my collarbone, urging me to justify my existence to people who had never genuinely valued it. But my professional discipline overrode the emotional bait. In the corporate sector, when an investigator deals with a hostile claimant committing insurance fraud, there is a cardinal rule. You never interrupt them while they are actively setting their own trap. You allow them to spin their elaborate narrative. You let them commit to the lie on the official record. The more words they use, the more rope they provide. I did not reply to Clara. I did not respond to David. I sat quietly in the kitchen, cataloging the incoming text messages. I grabbed a notepad and a pen from my briefcase, mapping the exact scope of the smear campaign. I noted which cousins chimed in with manufactured pity, which aunts offered names of local therapists, and which relatives stayed silent. My analytical mind categorized each sender, calculating the extent of Patricia's influence across our extended social circle. She was organizing an audience. She was setting the stage for a public confrontation, ensuring every spectator was preconditioned to view me as the villain. The psychological toll of this tactic is profound. For 35 years, these people constituted my entire concept of family. We shared holiday meals, celebrated milestones, and maintained the polite fiction of unconditional bonds. Now, within the span of a few hours, that entire network had turned against me. They had convicted me without a trial, based entirely on the weeping performance of a woman who prioritized floral centerpieces over her own grandchildren. The isolation was distinct and heavy. I was an island of facts, surrounded by an ocean of coordinated gaslighting. I looked at my dual monitors, displaying the undeniable arithmetic of the theft. The data was perfect. The ledger was clean. But data alone cannot penetrate a wall of social conditioning. If I presented this spreadsheet to a jury that had already diagnosed me as legally insane, the numbers would bounce off their prejudice. People believe what they want to believe, and my family wanted to believe Patricia was a saint because it required zero effort on their part. I needed a different kind of leverage. I needed a mechanism that transcended familial gossip and entered the realm of undeniable statutory authority. I needed a weapon that Patricia could not weep her way out of. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Heavy, unhurried footsteps approached the kitchen. I turned my head away from the glowing monitors. Grandpa Harrison walked through the arched doorway. He was not looking at his phone. He was not checking the latest influx of manufactured family drama. He carried something substantial in his weathered hands. It was a dark, solid steel lockbox secured with a thick, tarnished brass latch. He moved with purpose, projecting a gravitational pull that silenced the buzzing notifications on my desk. He approached the oak table and set the heavy metal container down right next to my laptop. The thud of the steel against the wood was definitive. It was the sound of a foundation settling into place. Harrison rested his calloused hand flat against the cold lid. He looked at the buzzing smartphone, then shifted his steady gaze to meet mine. A lie only works if the audience believes the storyteller owns the stage, he stated quietly. I stared at the brass latch. The forensic spreadsheet was only the first layer of the deception. The true leverage, the structural beam holding up Patricia's entire rented kingdom, was locked inside that box. Grandpa Harrison did not offer a dramatic preamble. He produced a ring of antique keys from the pocket of his canvas jacket. He selected a small, notched key and inserted it into the locking mechanism of the steel box. The internal tumblers clicked with a heavy, satisfying sound. He pushed the lid backward, exposing the contents. The interior smelled of dry cedar, aged parchment, and dormant secrets. Inside lay decades of neatly organized files. I saw original bank ledgers, birth certificates, and thick manila envelopes secured with brittle rubber bands. Harrison bypassed the personal correspondence and reached for a legal-sized folder resting at the very bottom of the stack. He withdrew a few stapled documents and slid them across the smooth oak surface toward my hands. Read the top page, he instructed. Look specifically at the grantor and grantee designations. I picked up the paperwork. The texture of the thick paper felt substantial against my fingertips. It was a formal warranty deed, stamped and notarized by the county clerk. My eyes scanned the legal description of the property. The text detailed the exact parcel of land, the lot boundaries, and the residential zoning codes for the sprawling estate where my mother currently resided. It was the exact property where Patricia was presently arranging imported flowers and preparing to host her prestigious Historical Society brunch. I moved my gaze down the page to the ownership lines, expecting to see a joint tenancy or a corporate trust registered in my parents' names. Patricia Graham and Richard Graham were not listed as the legal proprietors. Their names did not appear anywhere on the title transfer. Harrison held the sole unencumbered deed to the estate. I read the text a second time to ensure my professional comprehension was accurate. The grand Southern manner my mother utilized as the supreme symbol of her social superiority did not actually belong to her. She possessed zero equity in the property. The aristocratic facade she projected to the entire congregation, the country club, and the extended family was a hollow, rented illusion. 30 years ago, Richard ran his first logistics venture into a severe deficit. Harrison explained, taking a seat across from me at the kitchen table. He faced imminent bankruptcy long before his recent offshore millions ever existed. Your mother wept on my front porch. She claimed they would be homeless with 2 young girls. I owned that secondary property free and clear. I offered them the residence without a lease agreement. They could live there rent-free, allowing Richard to rebuild his commercial inventory. Harrison folded his hands together. His knuckles were pale and rigid. But I established one strict, non-negotiable condition, Harrison continued. I detest favoritism. I watched my own sister suffer under a mother who played favorites, and I refused to let that poison infect my grandchildren. I told Patricia she could keep the house only if she treated both her daughters with exact, equal fairness. If she ever elevated one child at the expense of the other, the arrangement would immediately terminate. The architecture of the deception finally materialized in its entirety. It was a sophisticated fiscal shell game constructed to hide multiple layers of dependency. Patricia and Richard lived on Harrison's charity, saving thousands of dollars a month in housing costs. Meanwhile, they hijacked my earned income under the false pretense of business debt and medical emergencies. They then routed my hijacked capital directly to Lauren, funding her luxury subdivision mortgage and premium vehicle lease. Patricia positioned herself as the wealthy matriarch. She positioned Lauren as the successful independent prodigy. She positioned me as the perpetual, struggling burden. Yet if you stripped away the stolen funds and the borrowed real estate, I was the only adult in the family standing on my own 2 feet. By funneling my salary to Lauren and abandoning my children in the ashes of a house fire, Patricia had not just betrayed me. She had fundamentally violated the cardinal rule of her housing agreement. She had broken the contract that kept a roof over her head. The sheer irony of the situation struck me with the physical force of a falling beam. Mere hours ago, I stood on the cracked asphalt of my driveway, watching my life burn. I called my mother, seeking basic shelter. Patricia had stood in the foyer of that sprawling estate surrounded by floral centerpieces and told me I was a disruption. She told me to find a roadside motel. She attempted to banish me from a kingdom she did not even own. She was a tenant masquerading as a monarch. I placed the warranty deed down next to my digital spreadsheets. The dual monitors displayed the 120 months of undeniable theft. The paper document displayed the ultimate statutory leverage. Patricia had executed a brilliant preemptive strike by activating the Whisper Network. She had successfully isolated me, turning Aunt Clara, Uncle David, and the rest of the extended bloodline into her personal jury. She anticipated that the crushing pressure of familial gossip would force me into submission, burying the truth under a mountain of manufactured psychological concern. But gossip is fragile. It relies on the assumption of shared reality. Patricia's entire smear campaign hinged on her perceived social superiority and her flawless reputation. I looked at Harrison. He watched me process the data, waiting for the actuary to reach the logical conclusion. We have the paperwork. I stated, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet kitchen. We have the banking ledgers proving the extortion, the corporate filings proving Richard's offshore millions, and the property deed proving Patricia is living on charity. Harrison gave a single confirming nod. But presenting this evidence in private will achieve nothing. I continued tapping my pen against the legal folder. If I confront her alone, she will simply deny it. She will spin a new narrative, play the weeping victim, and run back to her echo chamber to claim I threatened her. Digital screens can be dismissed as manipulated. Private conversations can be twisted. A lie requires a stage, Harrison noted quietly, and the truth requires an audience. The legal trap was officially set. The perimeter was secured. I possessed the raw mathematics of her theft and the statutory authority to dismantle her living situation. To execute the audit properly, I needed to bypass the Whisper Network entirely. I needed to deliver the verdict directly to the jury Patricia had so carefully assembled. We need a stage, I said, looking down at the heavy steel lockbox. We need Patricia to gather everyone in one room, entirely unaware that the trial she is orchestrating is meant for her. The transformation from victim to auditor requires a specific, meticulous preparation. Digital files existing on a cloud server possess zero tactical impact in a physical confrontation. You cannot slide a laptop across a dining table and expect a hostile crowd to absorb the data. Screens can be turned off. Emails can be deleted. Digital evidence lacks the gravitational pull necessary to shatter a generational illusion. Physical paper carries an undeniable psychological weight. Tangible documents demand a physical response. I requested Harrison's permission to utilize the heavy-duty laser printer located in his home office. He nodded, pointing toward the back hallway. I connected my laptop to the local network. I verified the toner levels and loaded a fresh ream of crisp white paper into the feeding tray. I pressed the print command. The machine whirred to life with a low mechanical hum. The internal gears engaged, pulling the blank sheets through the rollers. One by one, the pages slid into the output tray. Page 1 detailed the initial lie. Page 5 highlighted the luxury vehicle payments. Page 8 exposed the country club dining minimums. Page 12 revealed Richard's offshore corporate filings and the multi-million-dollar logistics buyout. I gathered the warm stack of paper and tapped the edges against the wooden desk to align them perfectly. I walked to the guest bedroom where I had left my work briefcase. I retrieved a heavy black industrial leather binder. It was the specific portfolio I used during high-level corporate arbitrations. I also pulled out a fresh box of clear plastic sheet protectors. I returned to the oak table in the kitchen and began the methodical process of assembling my evidence. I slid the copied warranty deed, the undeniable proof of Patricia's rented kingdom, into the very first plastic sleeve. In the subsequent pages, I inserted the printed bank statements. I arranged the 120 months of stolen deposits in perfect chronological order. I made sure the vibrant blue and red highlighted routing destinations were facing outward, impossible to miss. The leather binder grew thick. It contained the exact blueprint of their deceit. It was a weapon forged from mathematics blue ink and statutory law. I snapped the metal rings shut. The sharp click echoed in the quiet room. The lingering anxiety regarding my destroyed home dissolved, replaced entirely by the cool, calculating focus of a professional preparing to deliver a final verdict. While the binder represented my offensive capability, I still needed to secure my defensive perimeter. I opened my laptop one last time and initiated a video conference with a fiduciary attorney I frequently consulted for corporate risk assessments. I explained my situation briefly, focusing strictly on the financial exposure. I instructed her to draft the necessary paperwork to establish an irrevocable trust for Maya and Leo. I directed her to funnel my remaining insurance payouts, my liquid savings, and all future assets directly into that protected vehicle. The attorney expedited the request. Within an hour, I signed the digitized documents. The legal firewall was poured and cured. My capital was officially untouchable by any emotional, legal, or social threat my parents might attempt to leverage against me. I had effectively armored my perimeter. I checked the analog clock on the kitchen wall. It was early afternoon. I walked down the hall to check on the twins. Harrison had fed them lunch, and they were watching a nature documentary on the television. I gathered their soot-stained pajamas and threw them into the washing machine. I instructed Maya and Leo to change into the fresh, durable denim clothing we had purchased at a discount retail store earlier that morning. The new garments fit them perfectly. They looked resilient, comfortable, and entirely unaffected by the toxic dynamics brewing across town. We were no longer displaced victims seeking emergency shelter. We were secure. I returned to the kitchen and poured a fresh cup of coffee. I sat across from Harrison. The steel lockbox remained open on the table, its contents safely transferred into my black binder. We had the evidence. We had the legal authority. We simply lacked the venue. Right on schedule, my smartphone illuminated. A sharp electronic chime broke the afternoon silence. I did not have to guess the sender. Patricia's Whisper Network campaign had saturated the extended family with rumors of my mental instability. Lauren was currently spiraling into a panic over her defaulted mortgage routing numbers. The pressure within their counterfeit reality was reaching a critical mass. Patricia needed to resolve the crisis quickly, and she needed to do it in front of the audience she had spent the morning grooming. I unlocked the screen. It was a group text message sent by Patricia to the entire extended family roster, including Aunt Clara, Uncle David, the older cousins, Lauren, and myself. The message was carefully crafted, utilizing the precise vocabulary required to project unyielding Christian grace while simultaneously issuing a strict command. "Dearest family," Patricia wrote, "this week has brought unexpected trials and deep emotional sorrow to our doorstep. We are hosting a healing Sunday dinner tomorrow evening at our home. We ask everyone to gather so we can surround Nefertiti with love, support, and guidance during her season of confusion. Please arrive by 5 o'clock. I stared at the glowing pixels. The invitation was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It was not a gesture of reconciliation. It was a formal summons to a tribunal. Patricia was organizing a public ambush. She intended to gather the aunts, the uncles, and the cousins into her formal dining room, using their collective presence to pressure me into reopening the financial pipeline. She wanted the relatives to witness my supposed hysterical breakdown. She wanted the audience to pressure me into apologizing for cutting off my sick parents. She framed the gathering as a healing dinner, but its actual function was to force my submission and secure her revenue stream. She assumed I would either decline the invitation, which would validate her rumors of my erratic behavior, or I would attend empty-handed, ready to absorb the firing squad of manufactured guilt. She believed owning the stage gave her the ultimate authority to dictate the ending of the play. I turned the phone around so Harrison could read the screen. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the block of text. A grim, satisfied smile touched the corners of his mouth. "She is setting the table for her own feast," Harrison noted quietly. I looked down at the invitation. I knew the rules of this specific cultural engagement. I tapped the reply icon. I did not offer excuses or request accommodations. I typed a single, decisive response to the entire group. I will be there. I placed the phone back into my pocket. The digital trap was set. The Whisper Network had distributed the invitations. The Golden Child was questioning her foundation. The extended family was preparing their rehearsed interventions. I picked up the heavy black leather binder from the oak table. The dark industrial texture of the cover felt solid against my palm. I instructed the twins to head toward my sedan. Harrison grabbed his coat, stating he would arrive separately to deliver the final component of the reckoning. I secured Maya and Leo in their car seats. I opened the passenger door and placed the binder directly onto the upholstery. The drive across the county felt distinctly different today. I navigated the familiar roads leading to my mother's upscale neighborhood without the usual knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I was steering my vehicle directly toward a hostile environment, knowing the entire room was primed to attack my character. Yet I felt a profound sense of calm. The architecture of their destruction was sitting right next to me. The drive to Nichols Hills concluded at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I shifted my sedan into park along the curb of the manicured cul-de-sac. The sprawling two-story estate loomed at the end of the paved street, framed by identical, perfectly trimmed hedges. The driveway was packed. I recognized Aunt Clara's beige sedan, Uncle David's heavy-duty pickup truck, and the various vehicles belonging to my older cousins. Lauren's pristine luxury sports utility vehicle occupied the prime spot near the front door. The entire family apparatus had assembled. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I reached across the center console and placed my hand on the cool, thick leather cover of the black binder. I took a slow, measured breath. I was ready. I guided Maya and Leo up the concrete path leading to the main entrance. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The interior climate was heavily air-conditioned, creating a stark sensory contrast to the humid Oklahoma heat outside. The immediate environment was overwhelming. The air smelled of roasted chicken, baked casseroles, sweet tea, and forced hospitality. The low murmur of a dozen overlapping conversations ceased the exact moment my shoes crossed the threshold into the grand foyer. Patricia materialized from the formal living room almost instantly. She wore a tailored floral dress, projecting the image of a resilient, caring matriarch holding her flock together through a tragic storm. She rushed toward me with her arms extended wide, capturing me in an exaggerated, performative embrace. She squeezed my shoulders, making sure her voice carried into the adjacent room where the aunts and uncles were waiting and listening. "Oh, praise the Lord you are here," Nefertiti Patricia announced loudly. Her tone vibrated with manufactured sympathy. "We are just so incredibly blessed that you survived that terrible blaze. The Lord protected you, honey. We know your recent emotional instability is just the trauma speaking, and we are ready to wrap your shattered mind in grace." She patted my cheek, presenting me to the jury as a fragile, broken vessel in need of her supreme maternal guidance. It was a brilliant tactical opening move. By publicly declaring me emotionally unstable right at the front door, she framed anything I might say or do over the next hour as the irrational ravings of a traumatized victim. She was immunizing herself against the truth. I did not pull away abruptly. I simply stepped sideways, slipping out of her grasp with cool, clinical detachment. I looked past her shoulder. My father, Richard, stood near the hallway entrance. He wore pressed khaki trousers and a collared shirt, holding a glass of iced tea. He did not meet my gaze. He stared intently at the toe of his leather loafers. His silence was entirely complicit. He knew about the offshore millions. He knew the medical bills were fictitious. Yet he chose the path of least resistance, allowing his wife to slander his widowed daughter rather than face the discomfort of an honest reckoning. I guided my children deeper into the house. The extended family occupied the plush seating arrangements in the main living space. They looked at me with a potent mixture of pity and severe judgment. Aunt Clara sat perfectly upright on the sofa, clutching her beverage like a gavel. The Whisper Network had successfully indoctrinated every single person in the room. They firmly believed I was a spiteful, erratic woman who had selfishly cut off her struggling parents due to fire-induced hysteria. Lauren occupied a matching armchair near the fireplace. My younger sister looked aggrieved and exhausted, likely mourning the loss of her spa day. She glared at me, her expression conveying a silent demand to fix her interrupted cash flow. She was the golden child, temporarily inconvenienced, waiting for the adults to force the difficult sibling back into submission. I did not engage with their staring. I walked Maya and Leo past the gathering and into the rear den. I turned on the television, selected a colorful animated program, and handed them each a small plate of snacks I had packed from the ranch. I closed the double doors, building a secure firewall between their innocence and the blast radius of the impending confrontation. I returned to the formal dining room. The sprawling mahogany table was fully extended, set with polished silver flatware and delicate crystal glasses. It was the centerpiece of Patricia's rented kingdom, the stage where she exerted her ultimate social control. I selected a chair near the center of the long table. I unzipped my carrying bag and extracted the heavy black leather binder. I placed it carefully onto the embroidered floral tablecloth, positioning it directly beside my ceramic dinner plate. The dark industrial texture of the leather created a stark visual anomaly against the delicate aristocratic table setting. The implementation of dramatic irony in this specific moment was profound. I knew the binder contained the 120 months of banking ledgers, the corporate filings exposing Richard's offshore wealth, and the warranty deed proving Patricia did not own the estate. I knew it was the definitive instrument of their social and financial destruction. But the extended family had no idea. Aunt Clara eyed the thick portfolio suspiciously from across the room. She leaned toward Uncle David, her voice dropping into a loud stage whisper designed to be overheard. "Do you think she brought an insurance catalog?" Clara murmured, her tone dripping with condescension. "Poor thing probably wants us to help pick out replacement furniture for that ruined house. I suppose we can humor her before Patricia addresses the real issue." I did not correct her assumption. Let her believe the black binder was a catalog of tragic losses. They were entirely unaware it was their execution warrant. The relatives slowly migrated from the living room and took their assigned seats. Patricia orchestrated the serving process, hovering over the platters of food, ensuring everyone received an ample portion of her generosity. At the head of the table, Patricia proudly set down a heavy, ornate wooden box. She unlatched the lid, revealing a set of antique sterling silver serving spoons. She lifted one of the spoons, holding it up to catch the light from the crystal chandelier. "These belong to your great-grandmother," Patricia announced to the table, her voice swelling with pride. "They are true heirlooms of our wealth, a reminder that our family has always maintained a standard of excellence, even during difficult trials." She used the silver spoon to dish out roasted potatoes, making sure every guest noted the supposed generational prosperity it represented. It was a classic display of narcissism. She was utilizing an object to project an aura of established nobility, actively masking the reality that her current lifestyle was funded by extorting a young widow. The small talk that accompanied the meal was agonizingly tense. It was a calculated series of veiled barbs and passive-aggressive parables. Uncle David loudly recounted a story about a neighbor who had lost his way, emphasizing how the prodigal son always returns to beg for forgiveness. Clara steered the conversation toward biblical duty, quoting scriptures about honoring thy father and mother, remarking how modern generations have lost their sense of familial obligation. The dialogue was a tightening noose designed to make me feel isolated, ungrateful, and surrounded. I ate my meal in total silence. I chewed my food methodically. I did not offer any defensive replies to their pointed anecdotes. I did not attempt to correct their false assumptions. I let them expend their energy. Patricia mistook my silence for submission. She looked at me from the head of the mahogany table, her eyes glittering with the anticipation of an easy victory. She believed the crushing weight of the family tribunal had successfully broken my spirit. She assumed I was sitting there quietly, preparing to surrender my autonomy and reinstate the monthly financial transfers. The dining process gradually wound down. The silverware rested against the empty ceramic plates. The ambient chatter dwindled into a thick, expectant hush. The room held its collective breath. The stage was finally set. Patricia stood up from her ornate chair. She smoothed the front of her floral dress. She reached across the tablecloth and picked up her prized antique silver serving spoon. She tapped the heavy metal against her crystal water goblet, producing a sharp, ringing chime that commanded the attention of the entire room. The sharp chime of the antique silver spoon against the crystal goblet hung in the stale, air-conditioned atmosphere of the formal dining room. The overlapping murmurs of the extended family ceased. Every relative turned their attention toward the head of the long mahogany table. Patricia stood up, smoothing the floral fabric of her dress. She placed her hands on the polished wood, bowing her head for a fleeting second as if gathering divine strength. She was stepping onto her preferred stage, ready to deliver a performance she had refined over decades of church committee meetings and historical society brunches. My mother understands the mechanics of an audience. She did not begin with anger or accusations. She started with a soft, trembling whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward just to hear her words. "Family is a fortress," Patricia began. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of a Sunday sermon. "In this harsh world, blood is the only true shelter we possess. When the storms come, we rely on the foundation built by those who love us. We carry each other through the darkest valleys. That is the covenant of this household." She paused, letting the sentimental rhetoric settle over the gathered aunts, uncles, and cousins. I watched her scan the faces in the room, making deliberate eye contact with Aunt Clara, then Uncle David, securing their emotional investment. She was laying the groundwork, establishing herself as the benevolent protector of our shared heritage. Then the focus shifted. Her gaze traveled down the length of the table and locked directly onto me. Right on schedule, a single glistening tear escaped the corner of her eye and rolled down her powdered cheek. It was an astonishing display of physiological control. This week, darkness visited our family. Patricia continued raising her volume to a steady, mournful pitch. Our Nefertiti suffered a terrible tragedy. Watching her home burn to ashes broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I cannot fathom the trauma she endured, pulling her precious children from that smoke. It is the kind of shock that shatters the mind and clouds the spirit. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly in my lap. I analyzed her monologue the same way I evaluate a fraudulent damage claim. I mapped the trajectory of her narrative. She was intentionally highlighting my victimhood, using the destruction of my property to paint me as a fragile, damaged entity, incapable of rational thought. She was building a preemptive defense against any factual evidence I might present. Patricia took a slow, deep breath, preparing for the pivot. This was the moment she would transition from expressing sympathy to issuing a public reprimand. "We all stumble, Nefertiti," my mother said, her tone dripping with faux sorrow. "We all face trials, but a family must serve as the safety net. You cannot let your current emotional confusion drive you away from the people who raised you. We see how much you are struggling to manage your life right now. Your sister Lauren never has these crises because she plans ahead. She built a secure, fireproof sanctuary for herself." The audacity of that specific comparison hovered in the quiet room like a toxic gas. My professional brain detached from the emotional insult and focused on the structural absurdity of her statement. An electrical fire is an erratic, unpredictable peril. A faulty wire sparking inside a sealed wall cavity at 3 a.m. is not a failure of personal character. It is a sudden, catastrophic event that destroys a dwelling regardless of the homeowner's moral standing. Yet Patricia equated a residential inferno to a lack of life planning. Furthermore, she elevated Lauren as the paragon of stability. She praised my younger sister for possessing a secure sanctuary, entirely omitting the fact that Lauren's immaculate Nichols Hills property was funded by the survivor benefits of my dead husband. Lauren did not plan ahead. Lauren simply cashed my checks. I looked across the table. Lauren sat in her upholstered chair swirling a tall glass of iced tea. She took a slow sip, and a smug, satisfied expression resting on her flawless features. She believed the lecture was justified. She genuinely thought my house burned down because I was inherently disorganized, while her life remained perfect due to her superior choices. Patricia raised her chin, delivering the final calculated blow of her speech. "We do not want to argue," Nefertiti Patricia declared, projecting magnanimous forgiveness to the entire room. "We just want you to return to the fold. We want you to heal your mind, let go of this sudden bitterness, and honor your financial commitments to this family. We need you to restore the natural order of things." The translation of her demand was crystal clear to me. Honor your financial commitments was not a plea for my spiritual salvation. It was a direct, public directive to log into my banking portal and reinstate the monthly $5,200 automated transfer. She was using the collective weight of the extended relatives to extort the reinstatement of her stolen revenue stream. She framed the continuation of my financial bleeding as the only acceptable path back into their good graces. A heavy silence descended upon the dining room. Aunt Clara closed her eyes and murmured a soft, resonant agreement. Uncle David nodded his head in solemn approval, staring deeply into his empty coffee cup. The jury had reached a unanimous verdict. They found me guilty of irrational rebellion and sentenced me to a lifetime of continued servitude. The room waited for my reaction. They expected the familiar, predictable sequence of events. They anticipated that the crushing pressure of Southern family guilt would finally break my resolve. They waited for my shoulders to slump. They waited for the tears to fall. They waited for me to offer a breathless apology, to promise I would fix the bank transfer error, and to beg for their continued acceptance. I did not weep. I did not apologize. I did not experience a single shred of the guilt they were attempting to force upon my shoulders. The fire had burned away my capacity to absorb their shame. I pushed my chair backward. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, a harsh, abrasive sound that shattered the delicate, orchestrated quiet of the room. I straightened my spine. My posture was rigid, aligned, and perfectly composed. I looked at the faces staring back at me. I saw Clara's righteous pity. I saw Lauren's entitled annoyance. I saw my father's cowardly avoidance. Finally, I locked eyes with Patricia. Her tears had miraculously dried. She stared at me from the head of the table, her expression tight with anticipation. She believed she had won the engagement. She thought her public ambush had successfully boxed me into a corner where surrender was the only viable exit strategy. She had no concept of the asymmetrical warfare I was about to introduce into her pristine environment. I broke eye contact and looked down at the table setting. I reached out with my right hand and grasped the cover of the heavy industrial leather binder resting beside my dinner plate. The ambient noise in the house vanished. The distant hum of the central air conditioning unit felt amplified. The clinking of ice cubes in Lauren's glass stopped as she froze, watching my movements. Aunt Clara leaned forward, expecting me to pull out an insurance catalog to solicit their charity. I flipped the thick cover open. The first plastic sleeve caught the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. I reached toward the center spine of the portfolio. I grasped the metal mechanisms holding the pages securely in place. With a firm, deliberate motion, I pulled the tabs outward. The steel rings clicked open. The sharp mechanical snap echoed across the dining room like the chambering of a round. I did not raise my voice. In my profession, raising your vocal pitch implies a critical loss of control. It signals to the opposing party that their emotional manipulation is proving effective. I relied instead on the cold, irrefutable power of raw data. A fraudulent claimant thrives in the murky waters of sentiment and unverified anecdote. They drown the moment you introduce a verified ledger. I looked directly at my mother, maintaining the detached corporate cadence I utilized to deny invalid structural claims. "You are right, Mom," I began, letting the words hang in the stagnant, air-conditioned atmosphere. "Lauren does plan ahead. She possesses a remarkable talent for securing her own sanctuary. Let us examine exactly how she funds those careful plans." I extracted the master spreadsheets from the open binder. The paper was crisp, bearing the official watermark of my corporate auditing software. I did not merely hold the documents up for display from my chair. I stepped away from the table and walked around the perimeter of the dining room. I acted as a courier, delivering legal summons. I placed a stapled packet in front of Aunt Clara. I dropped a copy beside Uncle David. I placed the final packet directly onto Lauren's embroidered placemat, resting it right next to her iced tea. I returned to my seat, but remained standing. This single sheet of paper details every dollar I have wired into this household over the past 10 years, I stated. My voice cut through the stagnant air of the room. That is 120 consecutive months of automated deposits, $5,200 every 30 days. The grand total equals $624,000. The silence deepened. In our county, $600,000 is not an abstract concept. It represents generational wealth. It represents the kind of financial security people work 4 decades to achieve. Hearing that figure attached to the niece they viewed as a perpetual struggling burden triggered a visible cognitive malfunction in their minds. Aunt Clara touched her pearl necklace, her mouth parting in silent shock. "You told the extended family I was unstable." I continued panning my gaze across the stunned relatives. "You sat in your living rooms and whispered that I abandoned my sick parents out of pure spite. You painted yourselves as independent survivors who always managed on your own, but the mathematics contradict your beautiful narrative." I brought the routing data. I instructed them to look at page 12. I directed their attention to the corporate filings. "My money did not salvage a failing logistics business," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly level. "My father sold his freight routes 5 years ago for a 7-figure payout. He placed the buyout capital into a blind trust registered in Delaware." I looked at Richard. My father shrank into the upholstery of his chair, staring intently at the floral pattern on his dinner plate. His jaw grew tight with the shame of exposure. He sat at my Thanksgiving table and watched me clip grocery coupons while he hid millions offshore, I said. The motive was not survival. It was greed. The performative warmth of the Sunday dinner vaporized. The fragrant scent of roasted chicken was eclipsed by the sterile, unforgiving reality of cold math. I turned my attention to the rest of the spreadsheet, guiding the jury through the remaining evidence. "Now turn back to page 1. I instructed the gathered audience. "Look at column C. I highlighted the routing destinations in bright blue ink." Uncle David adjusted his reading glasses, his brow furrowing as he processed the transaction history. "Every month, exactly 48 hours after my deposit cleared, $3,800 was routed to a premium residential mortgage lender," I noted. "If you cross-reference the loan identification numbers on page 4, you will find they match the deed for the Nichols Hills estate." I looked directly at my younger sister. Lauren had spent her entire adult life insulated from consequence, floating on a cushion of unearned privilege. She believed she occupied a higher social tier through divine favor and superior planning. She had mocked my discount clothing, demanded I fix her declined credit cards, and sneered at my inability to maintain a flawless existence. She assumed the universe just naturally bowed to her desires. Lauren did not secure a fireproof sanctuary through superior choices, I declared to the room. A wire transfer containing her initial down payment left my designated emergency fund 10 years ago. My survivor benefits poured the concrete for her foundation. My trauma pays her principal and interest. I gestured to the red highlights on the paper. The remaining $1,400 covers a luxury vehicle lease and the dining minimums for Patricia's Country Club. I subsidized a lifestyle none of you actually earned. Lauren reached out with trembling fingers. She picked up the stapled packet resting beside her beverage, her manicured nails scraped against the crisp white paper. She stared at the blue highlighted columns, tracing the flow of capital from my designated routing number directly into her own structural equity. She read the name of her mortgage lender. She read the name of her vehicle financing company. The transition was instantaneous. The blood drained entirely from Lauren's face, leaving her complexion the color of old chalk. The smug, entitled annoyance that defined her personality fractured into 1,000 pieces. She looked at the raw arithmetic, realizing her profound independence was a meticulously orchestrated lie. Her sanctuary, her vehicle, her entire identity was built upon the bruised, exhausted shoulders of the sister she held in deep contempt. Her hands shook so badly, she dropped the packet back onto the tablecloth. She looked at our mother, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. The golden child illusion shattered, right there in the dining room, exposing the ugly, parasitic truth beneath the polished surface. Aunt Clara, still clutching the printed packet, sat perfectly rigid. Clara prides herself on occupying the moral high ground. Finding out she was utilized as a pawn to spread fabricated gossip wounded her deep Southern pride. She had called me a selfish, hysterical daughter based on Patricia's weeping phone call. Now holding the physical receipts of my stolen income, Clara recognized the true architect of the deceit. Clara looked at her sister with profound, unmasked disgust. She dropped the stapled pages onto the table as if the paper itself carried a contagious disease. She did not utter a single word, but her silent condemnation authorized the rest of the room to pass their own severe judgments. Uncle David shook his head in disbelief, his expression shifting from blind loyalty to deep suspicion. The Whisper Network had officially reversed its flow. The formidable current of familial judgment turned directly against its former dispatcher. Patricia stood frozen at the head of the table. Her carefully crafted matriarchal posture collapsed. The weeping, martyred persona she had utilized just minutes earlier vanished without a trace. When a cornered predator realizes a trap has snapped shut, they do not cry, they lash out. Her matriarchal mask slipped, replaced by a desperate, territorial rage. The veins in her neck became starkly visible against her flushed skin. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some rehearsed justification, but her throat produced no sound. The physical proof sat on the table in front of her siblings and in-laws. It was impossible to deny and impossible to spin. She could not claim this was a glitch. She could not frame bank routing numbers as hysterical delusions. Stripped of her hidden revenue stream, abandoned by her cowardly husband, and exposed before her peers, Patricia resorted to the final pathetic weapon available to a cornered host. She attempted to exert dominance over her physical environment. She believed banishing me from the grand estate would somehow restore a fraction of her shattered dignity. She thought owning the stage gave her the ultimate authority to dictate the ending of the play. Patricia slapped her palm flat against the mahogany tabletop. She raised a shaking finger, pointing it rigidly toward the heavy oak front door. "Get out of my house," she screamed, her voice vibrating with venom. "Take your things and leave this property immediately." The demand hung suspended in the chilled air of the formal dining room. My mother stood at the head of the mahogany table with her arm fully extended. Her index finger pointed rigidly toward the foyer. She sought to exile me from her pristine kingdom. In her mind, banishing the whistleblower was the equivalent of erasing the whistle itself. If I walked out the door, she could turn back to her siblings and attempt to spin the banking ledgers as forged documents. She needed me gone to regain control of the narrative. The relatives remained frozen. Uncle David stared at his ceramic plate. Aunt Clara gripped her linen napkin. Lauren continued to tremble in her chair. Before the echoes of her shrill eviction notice could fade into the floral wallpaper, the brass handle of the main entryway turned. The heavy front door swung open. A gust of warm, humid evening air swept into the stagnant foyer. A distinct rhythmic sound followed. It was the sharp, solid thud of a wooden cane striking the hardwood floor, accompanied by the steady scuff of sensible leather boots. The gathered relatives shifted their attention away from Patricia and turned toward the arched threshold. Grandpa Harrison walked into the room. My grandfather does not bother with the superficial trappings of high society. While Patricia spent her morning agonizing over catered menus, Harrison wore a durable canvas jacket over a cotton shirt. He carried his 78 years with unyielding posture. He grew up laboring on a working ranch, an environment that teaches a person the fundamental difference between owning the dirt beneath your feet and merely decorating the surface. Harrison gripped his carved wooden cane in his right hand. In his left hand, he held a thick manila envelope. He stopped just inside the dining room. His sharp eyes swept across the frozen tableau. He took in the sight of Lauren weeping in her designer apparel, Richard attempting to merge with the shadows in the corner, the aunts and uncles staring in stunned silence, and Patricia holding her tyrannical pose. Finally, Harrison looked at the leather binder resting open on the table, displaying the undeniable banking records. "It is not your home to banish her from," Harrison stated. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a resonant density that cut through the lingering tension like a scythe clearing dead wheat. The sheer factual weight of that single sentence paralyzed the room. Patricia lowered her arm. The color drained from her face for the second time that evening. She recognized the envelope. The defensive rage evaporated, replaced by profound terror. Harrison walked slowly toward the center of the mahogany table. The relatives instinctively pulled their chairs inward, clearing a path. Harrison stopped directly across from Aunt Clara. He unfastened the metal clasp of the envelope. He reached inside and retrieved the original notarized property deed I had copied earlier that afternoon. He dropped the heavy folded parchment directly onto the tablecloth, letting it rest right next to my printed spreadsheet. "I own this estate," Harrison announced to the jury of aunts and uncles. "I hold the sole, unencumbered title to this land and the structure sitting upon it. Patricia and Richard do not possess a single fraction of equity in this residence. They are guests." Uncle David reached out hesitantly and touched the thick parchment. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the grantor designations. He swallowed hard, looking up at Harrison with wide, understanding eyes. He realized his sister had spent 3 decades projecting an illusion of aristocratic wealth while quietly living on paternal charity. Harrison rested both hands on the curved handle of his cane. He leaned his weight forward, fixing his uncompromising gaze directly on Patricia. 30 years ago, your husband drove his first supply route into the ground, Harrison explained. His tone lacked any paternal pity. You sat on my porch and wept. I offered you this secondary property. I allowed you to reside here without paying a single dime in rent, granting Richard the financial breathing room to rebuild his inventory. The room remained dead silent. Even Lauren stopped sobbing, her breath catching in her throat as the final layer of her artificial reality peeled away. But I gave you one strict, non-negotiable condition, Harrison continued. His voice hardened into steel. I told you I would only provide this shelter if you treated both of your daughters with exact fairness. I told you the arrangement would terminate the moment you elevated one child at the expense of the other. Harrison lifted his cane and pointed the brass tip toward the banking spreadsheets scattered across the dining table. I let you live here to foster a family, he said, his words striking like physical blows. I did not let you live here to run a shakedown operation on my granddaughter. The phrase hit the room with devastating accuracy. A shakedown operation. It stripped away all of Patricia's pretentious vocabulary about duty and legacy. It reduced her sophisticated fiscal shell game to the level of common extortion. You stole over $500,000 from the only child who actually took care of you, Harrison stated. You siphoned her salary to fund a luxury mortgage for a girl who refuses to work for her own keep. And when the bill finally came due, when Nefertiti faced an actual crisis, what did you do? Harrison gestured toward the closed double doors of the rear den, where Maya and Leo were safely watching television. You abandoned your own grandchildren in the ashes of a house fire. You chose a historical society brunch over their survival. You broke the cardinal rule of my agreement. Patricia opened her mouth, a pathetic, high-pitched sound escaping her throat. She searched the room for a lifeline, looking at Clara, then at David. They offered nothing except cold, disgusted glares. The Whisper Network was dead. The audience she had cultivated to witness my execution was now sitting in the front row for her own. Harrison reached into the pocket of his canvas jacket. He produced a fresh, crisp legal document secured within a blue cardboard backing. It was the formal transfer paperwork he had finalized with his attorney. I am an old man, Harrison announced to the assembled witnesses. I have no desire to manage real estate. I am officially transferring the deed of this property directly to Nefertiti, effective immediately. This house belongs to the daughter you tried to throw out onto the street. The annihilation of Patricia's status was profound. In the span of 20 minutes, she had lost her hidden revenue stream, her social credibility, and now the very roof over her head. The rented kingdom had a new permanent landlord. Harrison did not wait for the shock to subside. He delivered the final logistical consequence of the breach. You have 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property, Harrison instructed. His tone indicated the arbitration was officially closed. He turned his head slowly, directing his flinty gaze toward Lauren. My younger sister shrank back into her upholstered chair, her eyes wide with mounting panic. Lauren was suddenly calculating her own terrifying reality. Without my monthly deposits, she could no longer afford the Nichols Hills mortgage. She was facing imminent foreclosure, and now her parents were facing imminent eviction. Let us see how well Lauren's pristine, fireproof house can fit you all, Harrison said dryly. The poetic justice of the situation hung heavily in the dining room. Patricia and Richard would be forced to move in with the golden child they had falsely elevated. They would crowd into a house that was speeding toward default, trapped in a financial ruin of their own making. The insulated bubble had burst, leaving them exposed to the harsh, unforgiving weather of consequence. Harrison turned away from the shattered matriarch. He looked at me, giving a single, decisive nod. "Gather your things, Nefertiti," my grandfather instructed quietly. "It is time to leave. We have a new foundation to build." I reached across the table, collected my scattered spreadsheets, and placed them back inside the heavy leather binder. I snapped the metal rings shut for the final time. The sound was permanent. I retrieved my carrying bag and prepared to collect my children from the den. The trap had failed, but the wreckage it left behind would alter the landscape of our family forever. The acoustic environment behind me shifted from a stunned, breathless silence into a chaotic, fragmented tribunal. I did not turn my head to witness the carnage unfolding in the formal dining room. I did not need visual confirmation to understand the severe structural collapse occurring around that polished mahogany table. The tribunal was over. I packed up my binder and walked out into the humid evening air. As I guided Maya and Leo toward my sedan, a new question surfaced in my mind. The audit was complete and the verdict was delivered. But what happens to a kingdom when the treasury runs empty and the landlord changes the locks? 90 days passed since the heavy oak door of the estate closed behind me. In the corporate risk sector, a catastrophic file does not remain active indefinitely. Eventually, the structural assessment concludes, the liability is distributed. The final paperwork receives an authorized signature, and the claim officially closes. The new reality settled over our family with that exact, cold finality. My mother refused to surrender her rented kingdom quietly. She and Richard attempted to retain legal counsel to contest Harrison's eviction notice. Patricia scheduled a premium consultation with a prominent real estate litigator located in the downtown commercial district. She intended to argue that her 3 decades of continuous occupancy established an implicit ownership right. However, complex property disputes require significant liquid capital. The attorney reviewed the stark documentation, recognized a losing battle against a notarized warranty deed, and requested a substantial retainer fee up front. Patricia could not produce the funds. Her primary revenue stream had dried up the moment I canceled the automated bank draft. Richard, possessing millions in a hidden Delaware trust, refused to liquidate his offshore assets to fund a losing legal war. His greed overpowered his desire to defend his wife. He preferred to hoard his secret wealth rather than pay exorbitant attorney fees. The litigator politely declined the case. My fiduciary attorney dispatched a single cease and desist response that neutralized their remaining threats. The 30-day eviction mandate stood unchallenged. Stripped of my $5,200 a month, my parents lacked the necessary liquidity to secure another upscale residence. They were forced to pack their curated lives into cardboard boxes and vacate the sprawling manor. They relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment complex situated near a noisy industrial park on the outskirts of Tulsa. The new unit featured thin, uninsulated drywall, scuffed linoleum flooring, and a shared, uncovered parking lot. The scent of stale cigarette smoke drifted through the ventilation shafts. It was a brutal, undeniable downgrade. The physical constraints of the apartment meant Patricia could no longer host her historical society brunches. The most striking symbol of her downfall involved her prized heirlooms. Faced with first-month rent, a steep security deposit, and a husband unwilling to tap his secret fortune, Patricia opened her ornate wooden box. She carried her antique sterling silver serving spoons to a local pawn shop. The very objects she had wielded to project an aura of established nobility just weeks prior were traded across a glass counter for basic survival funds. The financial ruin was only a fraction of the fallout. The most devastating blow originated from the church pews. Aunt Clara had witnessed the raw, irrefutable documentation of the theft. Clara operates the regional gossip network with ruthless military efficiency. Finding out she was utilized as a pawn to spread fabricated lies about my mental stability deeply offended her Southern pride. She turned the full, terrifying power of her whisper campaign directly against her own sister. Clara utilized the weekly church prayer circle as her primary broadcasting mechanism. She framed her gossip as deep spiritual concern, ensuring the true story of the stolen $500,000 spread through the congregation like a localized wildfire. Clara bowed her head, closed her eyes, and asked the study group to pray for Patricia. She detailed the exact routing numbers, the luxury car payments, and the shocking revelation that Patricia did not even own the manor she boasted about. The community that once revered my parents as pillars of respectability now actively shunned them. When Patricia and Richard walked into the Sunday morning worship service, former friends turned their backs. Invitations to neighborhood social gatherings abruptly ceased. The performative image Patricia worshipped collapsed into ash, leaving her socially isolated and quietly disgraced. My younger sister faced a similarly swift fiscal reckoning. Without the steady monthly injection of stolen funds, the harsh reality of her Nichols Hills mortgage crashed down upon her shoulders. Lauren missed her very first independent payment cycle. The lending institution issued a formal warning notice. Panic quickly replaced her former arrogant posture. Facing the imminent threat of foreclosure and severe credit destruction, Lauren was forced to list her pristine sanctuary on the open residential market. Because she required an immediate buyer to avoid total bankruptcy, she sold the property at a staggering financial loss. She traded her vaulted ceilings, custom drapery, and imported rugs for a modest rental unit located in a loud commercial district. The poetic justice of her new reality landed with perfect symmetry. Stripped of her unearned leisure time and her premium vehicle, Lauren had to secure actual wage-earning employment. She traded her designer athletic apparel for sensible business casual attire. Lauren now works 40 hours a week as a front desk receptionist at a local fire damage restoration company. She spends her days answering ringing telephones. She is forced to listen to the desperate voices of real victims who have just lost their homes to actual blazes. She types intake forms for families standing on cracked asphalt, cataloging the charred remains of their living rooms. She fetches coffee for her managers while documenting the exact type of trauma she once dismissed as a minor inconvenience. For the first time in her adult life, Lauren is experiencing the exhausting, mundane reality of earning her own survival. The magical family trust is gone, replaced by a biweekly paycheck, aching feet, and a strict budget. I do not gloat over their misfortune. Gloating requires an emotional investment I am no longer willing to provide. The ledger is balanced, and my professional detachment remains intact. Occasionally, my smartphone screen illuminates with a direct text message from my mother or my sister. Their digital correspondence oscillates wildly between dramatic, tearful apologies and venomous, bitter demands. One message will arrive on a Tuesday evening, begging for a reconciliation coffee, citing the sacred, unbreakable bond of family. The next message, sent early Thursday morning, will accuse me of destroying their legacy out of petty vindictiveness, blaming my audit for their current miserable living conditions. I do not read the frantic blocks of text. I swipe the notifications across the glass screen, sending them directly into the archive folder. I feel no obligation to respond. The mathematics of our relationship have been permanently settled. The generational cycle of fiscal exploitation is broken, severed by cold facts and blue ink. I refuse to re-engage with their desperate, ongoing emotional theater. My energy is required elsewhere. The asymmetrical warfare is won. The hostile claimants have been denied their payout. The Whisper Network has no target. The hostility has no audience. I set my smartphone down on the kitchen counter of Harrison's ranch. The morning sun streams through the window, casting a warm glow over the oak table where the forensic audit began 90 days ago. The quiet peace of the rural landscape stands in stark contrast to the chaotic collapse of my former family. The slate is clean. The financial hemorrhage is permanently cured. But looking at the empty digital ledger, a new question naturally arises in my mind. The destructive elements of my past have been neutralized, leaving behind raw, uncontaminated ground. Where do I go from the ashes of my old life? And what kind of foundation will I pour next? The grand estate in Nichols Hills did not remain empty for long. Once the eviction notice expired and my parents vacated the premises, the sprawling house became a frozen asset. I did not experience a single ounce of sentimental attachment to the structure. It was merely a sequence of brick, mortar, and taxable square footage waiting to be liquidated. I hired a commercial real estate broker specializing in premium lots. We walked through the empty rooms where Patricia once held court. Stripped of the antique silver and floral arrangements, the hollow acoustics of the dining room revealed it for what it truly was, a sterile space built on a foundation of lies. We listed the property not as a residential sanctuary, but as a prime development parcel. A corporate developer purchased the lot within 14 days, intending to level the manor and construct a boutique condominium complex. I signed the closing documents on a Tuesday morning in a quiet, glass-walled conference room. The buyer wired the purchase funds directly into my escrow account. That single transaction severed the final physical tie connecting me to Patricia's fabricated kingdom. The funds cleared by noon, landing in my ledger with a definitive digital finality. I did not absorb the profits into my daily operating budget. Generational wealth should serve as a secure foundation for the future, not a slush fund for immediate gratification. I scheduled a formal appointment with my fiduciary attorney. We sat across a polished mahogany table and established irrevocable trust accounts for both Maya and Leo. The proceeds from the estate sale were deposited into diversified index funds, legally protected and earmarked exclusively for their higher education and early adulthood. By the time my twins turn 18, their university tuition will be fully funded. They will enter the professional world without the crushing burden of student debt. More importantly, they will never feel obligated to finance my retirement to earn their place in my heart. They will never start their lives holding an invoice for my love. The true economic engine driving this fresh start was the continuous, uninterrupted retention of my own income. Keeping $5,200 every 30 days creates a profound financial momentum. The capital that previously vanished into Lauren's luxury mortgage and Patricia's country club dues now accumulated in my personal checking ledger. Combined with the final settlement payout from my destroyed residential property, my liquidity grew at a staggering rate. The financial hemorrhage was not just cured, the patient was thriving. I did not choose to rebuild my home on the original charred foundation in Tulsa. That lot held too many ghosts, too many memories of a daughter who set herself on fire to keep her relatives warm. I sold the burned parcel to an investor and utilized the combined capital to purchase 40 acres of untouched Oklahoma land. The acreage was located in a quiet, highly rated school district, surrounded by mature oak trees and wide open green spaces. The air smelled of damp earth, crushed pecan leaves, and wild sweetgrass. It was an environment designed for growth, not for maintaining appearances. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I drove out to the vacant lot to meet the lead structural contractor. He parked his white pickup truck near the edge of the property line. We stood in the morning sun, unrolling the schematic blueprints across the warm metal hood of his vehicle. I used heavy stones to secure the curling edges of the drafting paper against the mild breeze. I traced my finger over the drawn lines, studying the proposed load-bearing markers, the reinforced steel framing, and the high-grade masonry brick. We were not merely constructing a house, we were building a fortress. I selected durable, resilient components capable of withstanding severe weather and external threats. I chose a standing seam metal roof and specified deep concrete footings. I ensured the layout provided expansive bedrooms for Maya and Leo, a sprawling kitchen with a solid oak table, and a wide covered porch overlooking the distant tree line. The construction required 8 months of meticulous labor. I did not rush the architectural process. When you have spent over a decade subsidizing a counterfeit reality for other people, you learn to appreciate the slow, deliberate assembly of authentic materials. I watched the contractors pour the thick concrete base, smoothing the gray surface until it cured into stone. I watched the framers raise the timber skeleton against the sky, securing each joint with precision. I was standing on my own soil, breathing clean air, bringing a physical structure into existence that belonged entirely to me. Today I stand on the covered back porch of my newly finished home. The afternoon sun casts long, warm shadows across the vibrant green lawn. The neighborhood is quiet, filled with the distant sounds of wind rustling through the oak branches. Maya and Leo are chasing each other around the perimeter of a cedar playset I assembled last weekend. They are safe, they are secure. They do not know the taste of fear or the sting of being cast aside for someone else's convenience. A heavy truck turns onto the gravel driveway. Grandpa Harrison parks near the steps and walks up to the porch, his wooden cane tapping a steady rhythm on the composite decking. He takes a seat in a sturdy rocking chair. I hand him a steaming mug of black coffee. He does not offer a lengthy congratulatory speech. He watches his great-grandchildren run across the grass, takes a slow sip from his mug, and gives a single affirming nod. He is satisfied. The generational rot was successfully identified, isolated, and cut out. His legacy rests securely in the hands of the granddaughter who learned how to read the ledger. As a commercial risk actuary, my entire career revolves around analyzing the aftermath of catastrophic events. Human nature conditions us to view disaster purely as a destructive force. We mourn the items lost to the flames. We grieve the structures reduced to ash. However, my profession has taught me a deeper, harsher truth. Fire destroys, but it also sanitizes. It strips away the superficial layers of paint, wallpaper, and decorative molding to reveal the actual strength of the materials hidden beneath the surface. When a residential blaze burns hot enough, it tests the fundamental integrity of the internal supports. If the framing is solid, the core of the house survives. If the timber is rotten, compromised by years of hidden decay, the entire structure collapses under its own weight. My house fire functioned as the ultimate diagnostic tool. It exposed the rotting foundation of my family dynamics. My parents projected an image of profound, unshakable devotion, but their affection was highly combustible. It was constructed from paper-thin lies, stolen funds, and manufactured guilt. It required my constant financial sacrifice to maintain its shape. The moment the $5,200 monthly premium stopped flowing into their checking account, their artificial love incinerated. It vanished into smoke, leaving behind nothing but resentment and entitlement. In stark contrast, the disaster revealed the true fireproof structures in my life. My grandfather's fierce, uncompromising honesty survived the heat. My own internal resilience, forged through years of silent endurance and disciplined work, proved stronger than the flames. I did not crumble when the smoke cleared. I audited the damage, calculated the losses, and rebuilt on better ground. If you are listening to this and you recognize your own reflection in these words, pay close attention. If you are the designated shock absorber for your relatives quietly sacrificing your own security to maintain their comfortable illusion. If you are the load-bearing wall for people who would eagerly let you burn to protect their own status, stop paying the premium. Cancel the transfer. Let the rotten wood burn. Build your own door, secure your own ledger, and walk away.